Okay, today the only thing different is we're going to have to do some rearranging, and the rearranging comes from that we have to have the quadratic equation set equal to 0. So again, that quadratic formula is the negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Well, where does the a and b and c come from again? Remember, that's from the coefficients in front of the x squared, the b, and the c. Most importantly, the equation must be set equal to 0. So in this problem, you can see how the equation is not set equal to 0. So what you would need to do is add 52 to both sides. That would give you 3x squared minus 2x plus 52 equals 0. Now you can figure out your a, b, and c. Your a is 3, your b is negative 2, and your c is 52. Before beginning, if all numbers can be divided by a common factor, divide each before naming the a, b, and c. It will make things so much easier. So like on this problem, we could divide everything by 4, and then we could name our a to be 1, we could name our b to be 4, and we could name our c to be 2. It deals with such smaller numbers that it'll make a lot less work for us. Number 1 problem today. The first thing I notice is that they are not all divisible by something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides so I can get started. 3x squared plus 4x minus 10 equals 0. So now I can name my a as 3, my b as 4, and my c as negative 10. The formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So when I plug stuff in, I get negative 4 plus or minus, it'd be 4 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So I get negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. Well, I'm going to look at my negatives here. I've got negative times negative, so positive 40. 40 times 3 is 120 all over 6. That gives me negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 136 all over 6. Does 136 break down? I know 2 goes into it evenly because it's an even number. That would be a 60, let's see, 136 divided by 2, 68. 68 can be broken down into 2 times 34. So I have a pair, and then 2 times 34 can be broken, or 34 can be broken down to 2 times 17. So we really just have negative 4 plus or minus 2 square root of 34 all over 6. Each of these are divisible by 2, so I can make this a 2, this cancels to be a 1, and this would be a 3. So I'd get negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 34 all over 3. My second example here, I don't have this in the right order. I need my x squared term. I'm going to have to move my x term over, so I want that next. And then I have my 7. So make sure they're in order. X squared, then the x, then the number. The a is 5, the b is negative 2, and the c is negative 7. So when I plug it in the formula, negative b, I have 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared, which would be 4. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4, plus or minus 4 times a times c all over, oh, I made a mistake here. I'm so sorry. Let me just back up here. I've got b squared, which would be negative 2 times negative 2, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. This gives me 2 plus or minus. This would be 28 times 5, which would be 140. So I'm getting 4 plus 140 all over 10. This gives me 2 plus or minus the square root of 144 over 10. That comes out evenly to be 2 plus or minus 12 over 10. Now I'm going to finish this one up in the next video. Okay, so I was going to finish this one up in the video because we don't want to leave our answers in this form when we can break these down into two parts. This one says 2 plus 12 over 2, and this one says 2 minus 12 over 2. This one gives me 14 over 2. 14 over 2 is a 7. This one gives me negative 10 over 2, which is a negative 5. Moving on to the next problem, I noticed that this one can be simplified because I could divide each of these by 5. That gives me x squared minus 2 equals 0. So my a will be 1, my b happens to be 0 because there is no x term, and my c is negative 2. So when I plug in the formula negative b, I get 0 plus or minus 0 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Well, 0 is just 0, so you don't even need to write it anymore. So we really just have plus or minus 0, this would be plus the opposite, negative 4 times negative 2 is a positive 8 all over 2. Well, 8 can be broken down, or the square root of 8 can be broken down into 4 times 2 and then 2 times 2. So we end up getting 2 square root of 2 all over 2. The 2's will then cancel, and I can simply say it's plus or minus the square root of 2. My next example here, I always want to keep my x squared positive, so I'm going to actually move my 4 on this side. So this answer now says 0 equals x squared minus 4x plus 4. This is factorable, and I totally would factor it if it wasn't that I was practicing for quadratic formula. So my a is 1. My b is negative 4, and my c is 4. So I'm going to start thinking about what the formula says. It says negative b, so that would be 4, plus or minus b squared. B squared is 4 squared, minus 4 times a is 1, and c is 4, all over 2 times a. This one gives me 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 16 all over 2. Whenever you get a 0 underneath the square root, that makes 0. You only got one answer, so we just have 4 over 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2, so 2 is our only solution. I'll show you this using factoring instead. This factors into x minus 2 times x minus 2, and so when you set each of those equal to 0, you can see why you only get positive 2 as your solution. Last example here, again, I like to have my x squared term positive. It's not in this case, but we could make it positive by dividing by negative 3. We'll go ahead and just leave it negative for right now. Now I'm getting negative x squared plus 3x equals 0. My a term is negative 1, my b is 3, and my c is 0. There is no constant term. So the formula says negative b, which would be negative 3, plus or minus b squared, which would be 3 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. Because I'm multiplying by a 0 here, what I really end up getting is a 0 term, so those fall out. So I get negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 all over negative 2. Then negative 3 plus or minus square root of 9 is 3 all over negative 2. Okay, this gives me negative 3 plus 3 all over negative 2. And this gives me negative 3 minus 3 all over negative 2. So this is 0 over negative 2, which is 0. And this last one is negative 6 over negative 2, which is a positive 3. So my two answers are 0 and 3. This also could have been done using factoring. Quadratic formula is a method that we want to use when we can't